Sadeghipour. I am currently working at HackerOne. Prior to working at HackerOne, I was actually one of the hackers on the platform. So I kind of made my way through to work for the company at one point. I've submitted about 600 vulnerabilities on HackerOne to about 100 programs. My favorite ones are Airbnb, which I will talk about in a little bit, DoD, which we'll not talk about at all, Yahoo, Snapchat, Valve, and a bunch of other ones. I've also created this community called Bug Bounty Forum. If you're interested in learning about bug bounties, how to get started, read some of our AMAs with some of the top hackers in the community. I would suggest going to bugbountyforum.com or just going on Twitter and have a look with all the stuff we post. The goal about Bug Bounty Forum was there was 4 of us originally called the Alcoholics. That was our group. We would just drink beer and hack together on Skype. And then eventually got out of control, and we saw there was 100 people on our Skype channel that we didn't know about. And yeah, it got kind of dangerous. So we made a Slack channel, which is kind of private. But if you're in the community, we would love to have you on board. But a lot of the content we put on, the idea was, how do we collaborate? How do we enable hackers to collaborate together and have a platform for people to talk to each other directly without it being on Twitter? And how can we help people get started in hacking? So that's how the entire idea of building a community started. And then taking it a step further, we started doing talks. So I do this talk about recon. It's one of the things that I try to get better at on a yearly basis. I try to set a goal and get better at that topic. So a lot of it's going to be focused on recon. But before I get started, I just kind of want to see how many of you guys here don't know what a bug bounty is? Oh, I love this. Okay, perfect. I don't have to worry about explaining what a bug bounty is. And I'm not here to do a sales pitch, by the way. I'm just going to strictly talk about hacking and some other things that I've found. So a little overview, we'll talk about what I'm going to be doing. We're going to talk about asset discovery, content discovery. We'll get into some automation, and then I like doing dumpster diving a lot. It's been one of my favorite things lately, especially when it's online. And then we'll talk about some real-life examples of how I've done all of these, and I've gotten some really cool bounties. Or some other people on HackerOne who have done it as well. If you guys do see a piece of code that you want to take a note, don't worry about it. Everything is on my GitHub. So I'm going to wrap up with tools that I use or I created. Everything's on my GitHub. Don't worry about taking any notes. Just if you want to take pictures, go for it. But I don't want you guys to be focused on taking notes or whatever. So everything is going to be on GitHub. I think they're recording this. It'll be on YouTube. So just enjoy the content. So I personally do bug bounties for self-improvement. 4 years ago, I was in college, not knowing what I'm going to do with my CS degree. If you have been to a small state university, you know your degree isn't really going to take you that far if you rely on it. To put it nicely, you're not going to get the experience. So I roamed around my hallways of Sacramento State University, not knowing what I wanted to do. And here comes bug bounties. Gave me an option to do something I liked. So I pretty much flunked out of a year of college, senior year. I became a 5th year and a 6th year because I was focused on doing bug bounties. But at the end of the day, it helped me do a lot of things. So the self-improvement one was the best thing. Networking was the biggest one. I got my first AppSec job by just submitting a bug to Hulu. And then a year later, exactly, I reached out to Eric, who's the AppSec lead at Hulu, and I was like, hey, I'm looking for a job. Are you guys hiring? And in about a week or 2, I was hired by them just because they had that interaction through their bug bounty program. And back then, there wasn't even a bug bounty program. They just had a vuln disclosure where they say, hey, give us your bugs. We won't sue you. We won't call the cops. And I did. And it worked out for me. So yeah, I built my entire career based on doing bug bounties. I didn't do anything other than bug bounties for the past 4 years. So I'm pretty locked down on making my career out of this. So in 10 years, we'll see where I end up. Also, I do a lot of, there's also a competition part about this bug bounty things. We have leaderboards. My buddy and I, Yassine, we like to talk a lot of shit to each other. So every time he passes me, one time he passes me, we start talking crap. And then we go as far as going on Facebook and Instagram and, clowning each other. So it makes it a little fun. It's not always about, hacking. It's also building those relationships that, I've never met the guy until a year ago. But we've been talking crap to each other for 2 years now. Also, who doesn't like to make extra cash, right? At the end of the day, you can make a very large amount of money. I don't mean to say this, that I do make more money hacking than my job. But in some cases, I may be able to do that. You have to realize some of these companies are paying up to $15K, or maybe in the case of Intel, they're paying $100K for a bug. So if you get a $100K bug, that's about a salary in a day. So you've made your entire year's worth in one night, right? But it takes a lot of time and dedication and a lot of work. So recon. Recon is a definition. It's a military term. You want to know what's going on outside your friendly zone, right? You want to know who owns what do they have, how can you get into those non-friendly environments. It's the same thing with hacking. You want to understand how the application works. You want to find every entry point possible for this app. And you also want to find as many files and folders and endpoints as you can. But this gets hard. Some of these companies, like example, Yahoo has 2,000 subdomains, maybe more. How do you keep all that, right? How do you go after such a large company? And a lot of us, especially NAFI, we spend a lot more time on doing recon than anything else, because it's been a process when you have to actually enjoy doing, build your own process around it, build your own methodology, and it gets very fun because you find some really crazy stuff. It may not be even a bug, but you go, what did I just look at? And that's, at the end of the day, this is all because we're all humans, right? We all make errors. We all leak our passwords on GitHub at some point. It happens, but this is what makes recon fun for a lot of us. So for today's discussion, this is kind of a overview of what I'll be talking about. I'll talk about recon through asset discovery, then you can do the same thing with OSINT, and then you will talk about vendor services and how we can dumpster dive online. So yeah, let's get started. So on the first part of it is asset discovery. We'll talk about subdomain brute force and certificate transparency. The subdomain discovery part is literally you brute force. You use one of these tools on the right-hand side. You say, hey, here's a list of words I have. Throw it before the domain and see how many of these come back and how many of them are live with this subdomain. Cool, that works. But then you find other environments, like you find the corporate domain. It's something.corp.site.com. They maybe have a stateside, UAT, whatever that domain is or that environment is. You find those environments and you go after it because those are the juicy ones. Like a corporate side, it's probably juicier than a dev side. And also the dev side is probably better than the product side or the prod side because there's less restriction on those sites, new functionality and other things you can find on these different sites, right? So you want to go after those. And what I mean by the different environment is it could literally just be something like dashboard.dev.site.com, or in some cases it could just be dashboard-dev.site.com. So you want to find out how this site is, or how this company is creating all these different subdomains, find that pattern and go after every single subdomain if they're in the scope of the program. You can also go on Google and do the little thing on Google and it could give you some of the results, but Google could not index all these subdomains. But all of this is really boring because you're literally sitting behind a computer looking at scripts just running and giving you results. And in some of these cases, you can't find all these subdomains that exist. So I rely on certificate transparency heavily. The reason why I do that is because if the company cares about this subdomain, they're going to assign it a certificate, right? So why not cut the work in half and just go after all these search transparency sites? So there are some companies out there who created search engines when you can literally go on. So this is Census. You can go on there and search for companies if you actually look up the syntax on how they do it. So for Census, if you type in this giant string, it looks for all these DNS names that have been parsed on their database, and it matches the name Snapchat. So if I'm looking for, Snapchat-payments-gateway.snapchat.com, chances are with a wordless or brute force attack, I wouldn't be able to find any of these because I don't have these giant long names. I don't have Snapchat in my word list. I don't have -gateway-payments in my domain list, right? So going after the transparency, search transparency stuff kind of helps finding these niche subdomains. There's also Shodan. If you are going to school, apparently you get a free membership. I missed that memo. I paid $40 for a lifetime subscription. That $40 is probably one of the best investments I've made. We'll talk about why in a little bit. We'll also get into the examples. But the best part about Shodan is you can do a lot of filtering. So you can go based on port number. You can go based on the organization name. You can go based on certificates. You can do anything pretty much. There's also the whole host name and org, because if they're hosting a subdomain that the IP address that doesn't belong to them, then the organization is going to be example Amazon.com versus the host would be example.com. So you want to make sure you look at both of those. And Shodan makes it very possible. So they have pretty much scanned all of the internet and they have indexed it on their site. You pay $40 and you get access to it. Or you can cheat the system and just get a free one if you have an EDU email. There's also SearchSpotter. This is probably one of my favorite ones. SearchSpotter is the same thing, but they have a very nice API. And unlike Census and Shodan, they don't charge you to use any of this. They don't have a limit on their API. You just hit this URL, give it a username, give it a domain name, and it pulls all this data in JSON format. And if you're really good at doing some bash scripting, you can kind of clean it up, which we'll talk about that in a little bit when we get to the automation part. Cert.sh is another one. Same exact thing. You can actually use a wildcard with cert.sh. This is the best part about it, which is different. So if I want to look for every Snapchat TLD subdomain other than .com, I can put the wildcard at the end. And it gives you stuff like Snapchat Pizza. Didn't know that existed, but Snapchat that sells properties, production, all these other things. You can move the wildcard to the other end of it and look for everything before Snapchat.com. And you can see like on the right in this image, I'm just hitting the cert.sh endpoint or the API, and it's giving me 136 unique subdomains on Facebook. And yeah, it's pretty nice. We'll talk about how to automate this too in a little bit. So the cert transparency thing is a part of OSINT, but I kind of wanted to take it out because it goes more with the subdomain finding and asset discovery thing. But there's other things we can look for. Example, we can go to Aaron and look for all the IP addresses, or we can just go and find acquisitions, what other companies and sites have bought. So in case of Google or Facebook, these companies are buying smaller ones on a regular basis, and after 6 months of being acquired, they usually go into the scope of their program, right? So you also want to make sure you check those out. So the best one is to go to Crunchbase. You literally type in the company name. So in this one, I'm looking for Yahoo, which is now Oath. And you can see all the companies that they own. So in case of Yahoo, half of those are in scope. But if this was Google, the policy for Google is give us 6 months after we buy this company out, then it's fair game to hack on it. So if you go to Google, if you go to Crunchbase and type in Google, things like Nest would come up, Google.com, Alphabet, Waze, whatever else they own that comes up, and all of that is a new attack vector or surface you can go after. So that makes your attack surface a lot bigger. You can also go on Aaron. Same thing. You type in the company name. It brings you this page. You click on organization. Then it brings you to this page, and you can just look at the networks. So the third line down, it says related networks. You click on it, and it gives you all the IP addresses that belong to Yahoo, and then you can start doing more things with it, which we'll also talk about a little bit. We'll get to it. Also, you can do this on Shodan. I kind of said you can just put in organization as whatever. So for this one, I put org is Yahoo, and it's giving me about 400,000 IP addresses. Some of them may not belong to Yahoo, but a good majority of them are, and you can actually start looking at the whois process and see actually how many of them are belonging to Yahoo. So content discovery is when everything starts getting fun. So imagine you find all these subdomains, you find 2,000 subdomains, and the question becomes, so what? Like, what do you do next? So you start looking for the first thing you want to do is you want to visualize the entire process, or all the data you have found in all these subdomains. You want to see which one of these subdomains are actually alive and not dead. What are they hosting at a first glance? And then you want to start doing port scanning and look for interesting directories and files and take it from there. So this is the short version of how I do my content discovery. So when I do the screenshot thing, I usually go for port 80 and 443. I look at both because for some awful reason, some of these developers love to serve different content on different ports. I don't know why. Believe me, I see the faces that you guys are making. I made the same face when I saw this. And I find different things. Like sometimes I go to 443/ an endpoint. It's like 401, you need to log in. And I go, okay, port 80. No, you don't have to log in. Here's all the data you were looking for. Keep that in mind. Different ports could be showing different stuff. So example is, let's say you go on example.com, you do a port scan, port 8443 is open. Okay, we'll do a directory brute force, see what kind of directories and files are on there. Let's say you find admin folder that returns a 403, which indicates it's forbidden, which is a good sign for you as a hacker. That means there is an admin folder. You just got to find the right file to open up the admin panel. It's not always the index file. It could be changed to something else, right? So you brute force remote files and directories on admin, and let's say user.php returns 200, and this is when things start to get better. So you repeat this until you find more files and more folder names in that folder. Sometimes it could be some developer files. It could be some Git folders that's left behind. It could be backup folders. You never know. So you want to look for those in your process. So for the port scanning part, I just run nmap like everybody else. Those are the number of ports that I usually look for. Some of them are based on bugs that I have found. Also, some of the most popular ones that I've seen have services on. And I only do these ports because I want to speed up my process. Instead of scanning 65,000 ports, I want to just do the ones that matter to me. But doing this also allows me to miss some cool things. So if you have the time and patience to make this faster and do all the ports, I would suggest doing all the ports or adding more to this list. And then for the screenshot part, I use webscreenshot.py. You can give webscreenshot.py a list of domains, and it just goes through all of them. You can give it a port number also, like what ports to hit. And if those ports actually respond back, it will take a screenshot of whatever it's serving. So having that data kind of helps me not to have to click on 2,000 subdomains one by one to see what they're serving. So keep that in mind as well. And then for the directory and file brute force, there is these giant lists of programs tools you can use. These are the best ones I've seen. I personally like to use the fourth one, the search. It's in Python, it's threaded. It allows you to do a bunch of cool stuff, and it's also very stable. So that's the one that I use personally. Also, there is robots.txt. If you're not aware, robots.txt has a lot of good information. There was a time when I just went to robots.txt just to see what they had, and then there was an secret admin folder. And then when you type it in, it gets better. It doesn't have any authentication, and I just had access to it. So robot.txt and the cross-domain file as well helps. So also, the other thing that I do is using any of the tools on the right. Directory search is the best one because it also allows me to keep an archive of all my findings. So if I do a directory search, no matter if it finds anything, it makes a report for it. And you can archive those reports. So let's say you find a very cool endpoint on accident on a site. You can go through all your reports for other subdomains and other sites and see if that file or directory name appears in other places. You can just do that by doing a grep. So you read all your reports on the report folder of directory search, and you grep for things. So I'm looking for JMX console. That one wasn't the best, so I got a little bit more specific. So I looked at the Tomcat Manager HTML endpoint, and I looked for anything that was a 401. That means it's there. It just requires you to be authorized to the application for you to see it. And 9 out of 10 times you put admin, that works, and you get in. So those are the things that I usually look for when I run a huge scan. I just grep through it and find all the details. But all of these, again, take a lot of time, right? I go back to Yahoo where you do 2,000 subdomains, and if you're doing it all manually, you're sitting behind a computer waiting for one scan to be done, and then you type in directory search, all the syntax, next domain, right? It takes a lot of time, so you want to automate it, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So the biggest thing the past year was S3 buckets, right? Anybody hear about Verizon or the government or any other companies that had just S3 buckets laying around with like read and write? Those are big. You can automate that. You can find those. You can do it on Google. If people are hitting that site, it's going to be indexed on Google. You can just go s3.amazon.com, and I want you to find anything that has the company name in its URL. That's given me a couple of them that's been helpful. You can also look on. You can also look for instances like EC2 instances. It doesn't have to be an S3 bucket. By doing the same thing, just Amazon AWS, you can take out the S3 and then look for what comes up. You can also do this on GitHub. It's even better. You find more stuff. And you can automate it. So this is what it looks like doing Uber and Trello on GitHub and on Google. On the right, you can see I'm looking for anything that has Uber and its URL. Sometimes these may not belong to the company because people can just make these arbitrary and give it whatever name they want. But in most cases, if you click around the data that it's holding, to give away if it's owned by the company or not. And same thing on GitHub. So there are two tools that I use. One of them is called Lazy S3, which is written by myself and a coworker of mine, Yobert, where you give it a company name. So this, I'm giving a test, and it starts looking for these different environments and permutations. So it puts the company name before, in the middle, and after all these keywords. And whatever one comes back, so this one's saying 403, the admin one is saying 200. It gives you all these different response headers so you know which ones are active and which ones you can exploit. There's also one that's written in Bash by another coworker of mine. That's the exact same thing, but it's in Bash. It's a little bit faster than the Ruby one. We actually merged both of our environments that we had. Like whatever list I was using is being used on both tools. But it literally just takes the company name and puts it around these different things: dashboard, downloads, uploads, avatar, whatever. And it tells you which ones you can read, which ones you can write from. So Search Spotter was the one that I talked about earlier. You can make an alias, automate it, and find more subdomains. In the earlier slide, I showed the JSON response. It was kind of ugly. But you can just literally hit the searchspotter.com API, give it the domain. This is an alias that I wrote in Bash. And you parse using JQ, you parse the JSON, and you look for the DNS name values. And then you use set to clean up the data so it doesn't have any quotes, single quotes. And then you do sort use, so it gives you all the unique data. And then you grep for it to make sure it's not giving you some random subdomain that doesn't belong to this company. And you write it all to the folder and the file name that's the same as the company. So you want to take this a step further by automatically also doing directory search. Same thing. You say I make a bash alias called dir brute force. I go to the directory search folder, and then I say, hey, read the file from the folder above, the 11.txt, which the ones are user input for the company name. And then while you read that file, I want you to run this command on directory search with the extensions that I'm giving it, and then I say, look for HTTPS with the line that you're looking at right now. And the reason why I do HTTPS is because I'm pulling all the data from a cert transparency site, so they all have certificates, and it's going to be on HTTPS. So I don't have to worry about looking which one is alive. And then you take it a step further and say, hey, I also want you to do screenshot. So same thing, you do Python. You want to output it to a screenshot folder for that company, so I always have them organized in a decently organized way, so I don't get lost in my own folders. And then you give it an input. You say, hey, I want you to read this file and do the screenshots from this file. And then you give it a timeout of 10 seconds. So if it's not responding in 10 seconds, the host isn't alive, just move on. Don't sit there for hours at a time doing nothing. And then you make it even better. You put all of them together. You call it recon, and you say recon, and you give it the company name, and it goes through all those 3 different aliases, and it does them all for you as you wait. That was a game changer, which brought me to my next point, which is I created this tool called Lazy Recon. It's literally the laziest code I've ever written. It's in Bash. Please don't read the code. I promise it doesn't shell your box, but it's really horrible. But it works. It's made me a lot of money. So it does exactly what we talked about, a couple more things. So it grabs the headers, it looks for all the subdomains, it organizes it for you, takes a screenshot, and does an nmap. And then it gives you this ugly HTML report that actually helps visualize it. So this is what it looks like. When you type in Lazy Recon, I'm doing this on nest.com, which is owned by Google. It uses all these different tools and different sources to compile a list of subdomains. So one more time. And then after it's done, it starts looking to which ones are actually up and which ones aren't, and it starts to create different files for each one. So it puts all the ones that are dead in a different file, and then all the ones that are alive, it puts them in a different file. So in case you want to ever look at the differences the next month when you run the same exact scan, you have the archives for both of them. And then it says, hey, take a screenshot, but I failed to do this because there was 73,000 subdomains, and I really didn't want to stay behind this taking a Giphy of it and make it look like a mess. But yeah, that does the same thing, and then it creates this screenshot. So this is home.qa.nestapp.com. On the top there is a screenshot on port 80 and 443. It does a dig. It also does a curl so you can look at the headers I'm sending. So if you want to start fingerprinting different things, so if at one point someone drops an ODay on Jira, that happened a year ago, you can literally go through all your scans and look for the Jira header and see how many of the subdomain reports that you created have that header in it, and then you start exporting every single one of them for a bounty. And on the left side, it does a directory search, and at the bottom, I don't have the screenshot for it, but at the bottom of it, it also does an nmap and tells you what ports are open as well. Digital dumpster diving. This is a good way to pass time if you have a lot of it on your hand. It takes a lot of patience and a lot of beer. I'm a pro at it. I've graduated successfully from dumpster diving. So what do you do with dumpster diving is you look for lead credentials. I said that earlier. We're all humans. We make mistakes. Some of us make worse mistakes than others. Like getting our company in trouble by putting our passwords on GitHub. But yeah, you look for different things. You want to look for credentials, straight up SSO logins, LDAP logins. That happens. You want to look for internal API keys, internal headers, and so on. You can see it as a pattern, and you just start looking for all these leaks on GitHub. There are all these different tools that you can use. I don't know what tool I use for this one to take a screenshot, but all these different tools look at code on GitHub and tell you if they've found anything. I like to waste my time and do it manually. Then there's a reason why I do that. If I'm doing these things manually or automated, and I get this snippet of code that could be potentially leak credentials, if that parameter is empty, I missed the top and bottom of the code where it could have some internal subdomain maybe, it could have an email address, it could have a username, it could have an IP address. So if I don't do automated for this, it works out better for me because I don't want to miss on that information. And then there's been times when I look at one instance, I'm like, okay, this is useless, but I take a code and I'm like, oh, well, this endpoint looks interesting. Let's see what this endpoint gives us on GitHub. And then that finds me a vulnerability. And I'll talk about an example of that eventually at the end of the talk. So those are some of the patterns I look for. It's literally by getting creative. You want to think of like, what would this company call this API points? These are some of the most popular ones that I've seen happen, or the ones that I've found. X-PayPal is a fun one because you get access to the PayPal account. In some cases, they have a lot of money in it. The other one is the secret key for AWS instances, and there is tons of them on there. Yeah, those are different values that you can look for that people use in their code. Anyone here watch Mr. Robot? I hope so. Cool. Anyone remember this episode when they catch DJ Mobley and they tell him how they found him? So, oops. You're a couple of years behind, buddy. Well, in case you didn't know, he gets caught. Sorry. You can one-star me on this, but so they found him on going on this thing called the Wayback Machine, which is archive.org, where you can find a, I'm not going to read this giant quote, but this is the conversation they had with him while this was happening. Sorry for spoiling it. So you go to archive.org. For this case, I'm putting hackerone.com. And it brings up all these different versions of hackerone.com from 2009. I didn't know we were around back then. 2014, 15, and all the way to today. The best part is it's indexing all these different JavaScript files that you can review. In a lot of cases, there may have been a JavaScript endpoint that is not getting used anymore, but because of whoever developed that endpoint left, the other people that took over it completely forgot, and they left it there for someone to exploit. So if you can get your hands on old data, it helps. But going through JavaScript files is very, very ugly. But you can find some really cool stuff, right? You can find some really cool endpoints. I've seen people put their AWS keys inside of a JavaScript file or their SSO logins for some reason. There's a ton of more bugs. But there's a tool that a buddy of mine and myself, Zayat and I wrote. It's called JS Parser. If you guys have ever spent a day looking at JavaScript on a website, it looks kind of ugly, very confusing. But we made it easy. So what this tool does is literally you give it a JavaScript file, or you can give it 10 of them if you want. Just make sure they're not like 100 megs each, because then it's going to just crash. But it highlights all the endpoints that this tool thinks that the JavaScript file is using. So if in this case, it's going after Airbnb, and it's showing me all these different endpoints on their API that the JavaScript file relies on to make the calls. So if you do that with 20 other different files, in some cases you could find hidden functionality that's not released and is probably vulnerable before waiting for it to get released, which I'll have an example of that in a little bit too. There's also Trello. Please don't be this person. They went on Trello for some reason, and they thought it was a great idea to put all of their information about the company on a Trello board. I don't think there is nothing in there that's like not bad. They have the database info, they have their WordPress admin, and the best part is somewhere here there's a GoDaddy customer info. Even their pins on there. This was supposed to be used internally, but if you go to Trello.com and you look for different keywords, it's not so internal. I think Trello took this very seriously at one point. I'm sorry if you're here, but they took it very seriously and started shutting things down. But some people are still making them and making it public, forgetting that it's getting indexed on Google. Oops, I don't know who put that there. All right, so I have about 15 minutes, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time on the examples. So just finding easy vulnerabilities just by relying on search transparency. So these were two that I found. They're actually both on Shodan. The first one is I literally just queried for the host name being thecompany.com, and then looking for an open port. Does anyone know what port this is? It kind of says it on the title. It's a RabbitMQ port. And then they were using default credentials that got me in. This was a corporate IP address, so the actual subdomain wasn't accessible. But if you got the IP for it from Shodan, you just go to the IP and it works. Yeah, so there's also the other thing you can do. This is the Jenkins instance. I went in and put in the host name for thecompany.com, and then in the title I say look for dashboard Jenkins, and then this shiny little dashboard came up that has all their build info, all their API keys, all their AWS keys. And it was great. It was easy, about 20 minutes. So it wasn't that bad. But yeah, you can find these different things on there. I did an entire write-up on how you can own a company, in this case Snapchat, by just getting into the Jenkins instance. They actually paid another researcher $15,000 6 months before I did this bug for the same exact thing on a different environment. Also, if you're here from Snapchat, I'm sorry. So you can look this up, and it's on my blog. I don't want to get into it too much, but the TLDR was I hit this Jenkins site, and it asked me to authenticate with Google. Well, hell yeah, I'm going to authenticate with Google. My Gmail account works. I put in it clicked on my shiny picture, and it didn't check if they forgot to blacklist Gmail, I guess, and that got me in without any problems. And then it gave me access to this thing, which you can actually just execute code and do more than just echo. So discovering endpoints and hidden JavaScript files. This is probably my favorite vuln because this bug alone led us to find more bugs. And this is how we started making JS parser. This is the reason why we built JS parser. So this is actually public. It's not something that I've done privately that I can actually talk about. So this is actually we got a way to read other people's push notifications on Airbnb. And if you haven't used Airbnb, those push notifications have a lot of data, like where the house is, or what the pin code on the lockbox is, what time the check-in is, and what time the checkout is. All that good stuff goes through that. So we literally ran this. So I booked an Airbnb, and I got really nosy one day. And I went and looked at the JavaScript file that was in that booking. So Brett and I, Zaid and I, were pretty much found this thing that there were two endpoints. One was the air push notification, and one is the air SMS. They each had a vulnerability in them, but they were very hard to figure out because the SMS one requires you to have a verified phone number in your profile, which is fine. I could put my phone number in. But then it also allows you to send yourself an SMS, which is a text message. But the problem with that is that it's only 160 characters, so I only see the first top, which maybe not have information that I need. And then also there's a throttle because it costs money. So they're going to only let you send a couple of them a minute. And if you're trying to exploit something fast and you're impatient like I am, the 3 or 4 a minute isn't going to cut it. So we go to plan B, push notification. Push notification doesn't have a limit. Those push notification things, if you don't know what they are, you know those Farmville invites you guys get on Facebook? It says, hey, you've been invited to play Farmville with your friend on your phone. Those are the push notification. So again, it requires you to have a phone number, which is fine. I'll put my phone number on there. But instead of sending you a text message, it sends you a notification on your phone using the app. So there's two things that's really great about that. There's no limitations anymore. I can see the whole thing. And two, there's no throttle because it doesn't cost them a single penny. So what can we do with it? The great thing about doing JavaScript, you can see how the request is being created. So we were supposed to send this post request that had a bunch of different things, like your phone number, your country, your template, which the template one is really funny if I get to it in a sec. And then the user ID is obviously your user ID. But what was funny is that it also looks for an object ID, which is the notification that was sent to the user. And we wanted to see if we can get access to another user's object. So can we see someone else's push notification? But the funniest thing was, if I were to give it a wrong template, it would say, no, you have to give me one of these. Like, I'm going to tell you what I'm expecting you to give me, and only these things work. So on the left, you can see the SMS one, and on the right is a push notification. So we know exactly what we wanted to get out of this, so why not just put it to good use? So the first thing we did was, we said, okay, let's just figure out to send a push notification to ourselves. So we gave it our user ID, which I think this is Brett's user ID, Zayat. And then we said, okay, well, send me a title and body of test. And at 12:50 p.m., we got a test given to us on our phone. And then we go, well, what else can we do with this? Maybe we can enumerate the user ID or object ID and see if we can find one that matches the other. But it was just way easier than that. We just ended up using just keeping the user ID as it was and just going through all the object IDs, and then our phone started to blow up with different notifications that did not belong to us. So this was fixed, and I can tell you guys like the time, how much it took us to figure this out. 12:50 p.m. and then 1:07 p.m. 8:06 a.m. the next morning is when we figured it out finally. It took us a lot of time to figure it out, but at the end of the day, it gave us $9,000 for 12 hours of work, which isn't bad, to be honest. And then it gave us this tool called JS Parser that we ran through Airbnb with it before we released the tool, and gave us a remote command execution on their prod side, which is also on our blog. It gave us a SSRF, which gave us access to the internal network, which is also on our blog. And then they told us, hey, can you stop publishing stuff? Sorry. If Max and Nate watch this, I'm sorry. But yeah, they told us, hey, enough. But send us bugs. So we kept going at it, but JavaScript has been the biggest moneymaker for this case. Dumpster diving. This is what I have a lot of examples of. This company came up and it was like, hey, we have a bug bounty program. Can you look at our company? Hell yeah, I want to. But they were owned by another company. So I figured out let's say in this case, this is not Google, I promise. In this case, let's say Google, I'm looking at Nest Labs. Nest Lab is it was owned by Google, which is now Alphabet. So Alphabet becomes an umbrella company, right? So I was like, okay, well, let's see if they've made any mistakes. The developers on the umbrella company who was developing this, have they made a mistake in regards to this company specifically? And then this thing came up. I put in the company name, the asset that I was testing, and then I looked for password, and this this thing came up, which was a FTP that had a lot of backups, not just from that company specifically, it was all the other companies they owned. There was a lot of content on there. It was like terabytes of stuff. And this was a little bit after Christmas, but it was a very fun one. This was on December 28th, which I got $10,000 for it. It was a little too late because Christmas already gone by, but New Year's was fun. Yeah, I went to the New Year with 10K in my pocket, which isn't a problem. To be honest, this took me about 15 minutes. No, I wasn't expecting it, so I can't complain about the 10,000. And they were the best company ever because they were really nice and friendly. I kind of wrote like oh shit, I don't know if this belongs to you guys, but if it doesn't, can you figure out who it is? Because it has a lot of your data on it. It turned out it was there, so it worked out in our favor. There's more of these that I found. I found some FTP credentials on GitHub. That was $750, again, under 10 minutes. It's not 10,000, but $750, it's fine. Found some AWS keys. This company didn't understand what the problem was with this. They're like, okay, here's $500, go away. They didn't understand how bad this was. They rotated the keys, but I couldn't convince them to understand, like, hey, like this thing has a database sitting on it. It has your LDAP credentials. Like, it's gonna take me forever to, crack these. But if I had malicious intent, 10 hours, 10 days, 20 days isn't anything for the payout I'm gonna get from this. They didn't care. I didn't care. I just took their money. I said, okay, next one. Next one was the PayPal one that I talked about. This one was horrible because this PayPal account belonged to the, I don't know what the highest accountant thing is in accounting, but whoever runs the accounting team at that firm, this was their PayPal account for the company, which was great because I could see how much money they had. It was worth $500 to them, which is fine. It's still another $500 that I found easily by just sitting on a computer looking for mistakes. And then another one was an RCE. I legit just found an FTP credential. I went in there, I logged in, popped the PHP file, sent it to them, and it got taken down in an hour. So those are the kind of things that you can find. I think I found about 50 of these this year. It adds up. Sometimes I don't find anything doing GitHub, but it gives me just information on how this company operates. So it's good to see some of these come up and get paid for it. So I talked about the S3 thing. This was actually sent to us on HackerOne itself. Peter Jaworski, who is also the author of Web Hacking 101, excellent book on how to get started in web hacking. He uses all of our disclosed bugs on HackerOne.com. So if you go to HackerOne.com/activity, you can see all the bugs that our hackers have disclosed, and he wrote a book around it. He analyzes it. So for this case alone, he found the subdomain on S3, which is redacted from this, but he was able to use the AWS CLI. He did an LS first. He did an AWS LS, so to give him a list of all the files. And then same thing, you can just copy a file to this folder, so you can overwrite files, delete files, or add extra files to it. So in case of like if they're serving JavaScript file from the S3 bucket and you overwrite it, there's a lot of things that could go wrong with that. There's also times when people create these like CNAMEs or subdomains, and they point it to like AWS or a third party, and they're like, okay, I'm gonna grab I'm gonna grab lunch, come back and claim this on the other part, and they just completely forget. So it's just sitting there for someone to see where it's pointing to, and you go and claim that domain on the third-party service, and you can serve whatever content you want. You can fish, you can put a login page, whatever you want to do. So this is another example. This was reported to Starbucks on December 19, 2016, and this hacker got $2K for finding it. Also, if you heard from Starbucks, hello. I don't know if I know they're from Seattle, so I don't know if you're here. Hi. See, it always works if you say someone's name randomly. So this last one, this is the last one. So this last example is of how you put everything that I talked about in this talk and put it in one single vulnerability. You guys ready? So first thing was, one did an asset discovery. So I found this stage something.target.com. It has to be heavily redacted. And then I found this internal subdomain and internal folder that returned a login page. Cool. Well, I don't have a login. I can't get it. But I went to GitHub and looked for the subdomain. And it's like, hey, here's a username and password that may work. So I tried. The username and password didn't work. But what was really interesting was that it gave me an idea of there's an auth token that they're expecting. It's somewhere redacted in here in the curl request. So it gave me the idea of this auth token header that I had to redact. I started looking for it, and it gave me this handy curl domain. Handy curl syntax that hit this internal dashboard. It hit the API, so it was bypassing the API without a login. So instead of looking for a credential, it was looking to see, hey, do you have this header in your request? And does it have a valid token? If you do, you can hit our API. So I found this on GitHub, and I gave it a reboot, and it came back with, okay. So that indicates that this token is working. If I would have given it I changed the character in the token to one character, I deleted it, and it came back and said, no access, you're not authorized. So that was really interesting. So I went through the site, I went to the login page, and I looked through the JavaScript file. And on the JavaScript file, I found more endpoints. And one of them was really cool because it was something about accounts. So if I were to hit this internal API with the GET request and gave it this auth thing with the, all these two headers combined, it gave me a list of all the LDAP users and their usernames so I could brute force and do more things with. That was really, really fun. And that got me a $5,000 bounty, which I gave a portion of it to somebody else. But that was also a good payout. I get to put all these different bugs from asset discovery to finding a directory, going on GitHub, finding more information about it, using that information to find a token that actually authorizes me to use the app without having to have a username and password, and then finding usernames and taking it from them. So this $5,000 was the max payout, which was great. I like to collect those sometimes. It feels great. So yeah, this was all of the topics I had to talk about. Again, if you guys want to keep in touch, Twitter and GitHub would be the best way. Again, all the tools that I personally have written, it's on my GitHub. You can go and check out all of our programs on HackerOne at hackerone.com/directory. If you want to reach out to me, those are both my emails, one's for work and one's my personal one. More than welcome to reach out for any questions if you want to get started, whatever that is. We're also hiring at HackerOne. hackerone.com/careers. I'm supposed to hire some folks, so if you guys need a job and you enjoy what we do, you can check us out. I'm also doing a training next week. It's a little short notice at Hackfest, so if you guys want to come and check out a class and 3-day training on how to do recon and set up an application to find more vulns, I'll be at Hackfest. This is a list of tools that I talked about earlier. If you want to take a screenshot, this is your chance. And a lot of them, again, are on my GitHub too, so just keep that in mind. Did everyone get a screenshot of this? Cool. Thank you for you guys to let me go on about bug bounties and how I do what I do. Big thank you to all the hacker community on Twitter. If you look for bug bounty tips on Twitter, you can find a lot of good stuff on there. Some of these things that I talked about are coming from the community. A big thank you to all these hackers, especially Zayed, ITSec, John, who's also at the booth with me outside, Luke, Smigos, Jobert, and Mikhail. And thank you guys for listening. Also, I'm giving away a couple of things at our booth, 2 IoT devices. All you have to do is give us your business card in the next 15 minutes, and we're going to do a drawing. And if you guys want to talk to me more, I'll be also at the booth.